Hello everybody. Over the last few months, the used car market has positively exploded thanks to a combination of factors. It is without a doubt one of the best times to ever try and sell a car, but also one of the worst if you're looking to buy. However, if you know where to look, there are still bargains to be had, and that's what today's video is all about. A couple of months ago, my friend George, who with his partner Caitlin runs the Porsche Club of Great Britain up in North Scotland, decided he wanted a new daily driver to get him through winter. Up until that point, he had as his fun car a Porsche Cayman, which has been on the channel, and also a Mini Cooper SD from 2015. But that car was giving him some cause for concern because he sat down one day and did some maths and worked out that over the past 18 months, the Mini had actually cost him more in finance and repairs than the Porsche did. And that, as the economical daily, simply isn't right. He had no issue with paying out for the car each month, but that was only on the proviso that it was reliable, which it wasn't. So he decided to do what I think most of us petrol heads would see as the sensible option. Sell that and use the money he had in it to buy outright something just a little bit more interesting to get him through the winter months. So it's at that point that he contacted me and asked what I would do. Naturally, I told him to go and buy something sensible, like a Ford Focus, but he told me that no, that's not what he wanted because he had fallen for the lure of the wafty car. He wanted a bargain barge to see him through those cold months when you wouldn't really want to be driving something like a Cayman. And also, for something like that, driving it every day really does take away from the specialness of it. So he decided a barge is what he'd have to get. So again, I said to him, okay, the only sensible thing for you to buy as you want a car on a budget is a Toyota. As you can see, he didn't quite take my advice and instead bought this, a 2004 Jaguar XJ6. As we all know, Jaguar is a byword for dependability and reliability. But, as I hope you'll see, his decision may not have been quite as foolish as you may first think. Ford had actually owned Jaguar since 1990, but this car, known internally as the X350, was the first new flagship that had been produced entirely under their direction. And as such, it introduced a number of significant upgrades that made it one of the finest cars the company have ever built. Chief among those was the change from steel to aluminium for the majority of the car's construction. Because of this, the Jaguar XJ of this generation is actually 60 kilos lighter than the equivalent S-Type. That's pretty impressive. The engine range was also expanded for the X350, the previous generation coming only with a selection of V8s. You could still get those in this car in both naturally aspirated and supercharged guise, but at the bottom of the market, two new options were introduced for more cost-conscious buyers. For the first time ever, a diesel was available in an XJ, an all-new 2.7-litre unit allegedly designed specifically for the needs of Jaguar Land Rover, and it was, for the time, a pretty modern and smooth engine. Also joining the range was this, the 3-litre Ford Duratec-derived V6. It had a number of Jaguar-specific upgrades, so here it put out 240 horsepower, the main reason being the introduction of variable valve timing, and because the XJ was a relatively lightweight car, it was also a power plant that didn't feel out of place in a big luxury car. Underneath, you found an upgraded version of Jaguar's computer-controlled air suspension, known as CATS. And at the back, you had an all-new multi-link setup, replacing the old Jaguar independent rear suspension, versions of which have been in service since 1961. In the fashion of old-school Jaguar, the styling was an evolution rather than a revolution, and it was consciously designed to look very much like the outgoing X308 generation car, despite the fact it was entirely new. The interior is of a type that when I was 12, I couldn't think of anything worse. But now I'm not 12, I couldn't really think of anything better. It is sumptuous, it is luxurious, it is comfortable. Despite being the short wheelbase version, there is still plenty of room in the back, which was a significant improvement on the Jaguars of old. You have plenty of leather and wood throughout the cabin, and only a few details that hint at the car's age or the fact it wasn't the top of the line. In the centre, you'll find the traditional Jaguar J-gate V8, which here is connected to a 6-speed ZF automatic gearbox, standard across the range and very new for the time. Above that lever, you'll find a digital display, one of the pieces of the car which now dates it the most, and at the time it was new, cost some 5% of the car's total purchase price, over £2,000. Happily, if you want to use one of these as a daily driver now, there is a system called Jag Droid you can install, which means you can now use Android Auto and makes the car just that little bit more usable. Overall though, it really is a very, very nice place if you're in the mood for this kind of experience. This car also comes with one of the most impressive histories I have ever seen. A folder 2 inches thick of receipts going all the way back to when this car's owner bought it at 6 months old. And because of those, I can confirm that Ford's investment in Jaguar did bear fruit. Very few things on this car ever required more than a few £100 to get fixed. That being said, it's not without its faults. Unfortunately, the big Jag eventually proved to be a little too much for its previous owner, and he wound up having a small low-speed collision with the postman's van. That resulted in a broken bumper and a cracked front headlight. A new headlight from Jaguar was over £1,000, and that was a significant portion of the value of the entire car by that stage. So, rather than get rid of it, they accepted the Category N write-off and took a cheque from the insurance company. This meant, come sale time, it wasn't worth quite as much as it otherwise would have been. So, what did my friend pay for this car? 1,500 quid. So today's question is this: can you really buy a decent working example of a luxurious large Jaguar saloon for the same price as a service on a supercar? Let's see. It may come as a surprise to some of you, but a £1,500 Jaguar isn't one without its fair share of issues. However, in this case, I think they're all really rather minor. The car has a very slight wobble at certain speeds, which we've traced to either the track rod inners or one of the drop links. Larger cars also always have an appetite for bushes, so any purchase of this nature, I would always advise budgeting a little bit to replace some of those. That includes cars bought for quite a bit more than this. Beyond that, there are the aforementioned cosmetic issues we already knew about, and there have been a few small mechanical items too. The car does need a big service, and that includes the gearbox. This is an item which rarely gets serviced because it's not actually in the service schedule. These gearboxes were often called sealed for life, but that simply isn't true. Doing a gearbox service on one of these cars, or in fact anything fitted with an auto gearbox like this, will almost certainly improve the shift quality. Although it's not perfect, this is now shifting vastly better than when it was first collected. And generally speaking, this really is a stupid amount of car for the money. Just about the only creak in it is coming from the driver's seat, so sorry about that because I've put a fair bit of weight into it, so that is making it move around a bit. We've identified the offending part and it shall be taken out later and giving a ruddy good talking to. Overall, the thing is an utter delight in the way that only an old Jag can be. For Americans, if you're unaware, the correct spelling is a J, 5 A's and a G, and it rhymes with Swaaaag. The engine, although not the most punchy, does actually work quite a bit better with this than you may expect. Those seeking a performance car would certainly benefit from seeking out a V8. There are a few different ones you can choose from, but the XJR is always going to be the choice of the performance car enthusiast. Those can also be had for decent money, but unsurprisingly, 1,500 quid is not going to get you close to an XJR. In truth, 1,500 quid probably shouldn't have got you into an XJ of any sort. We suspect that even with its Cat N status, the seller of this probably did undervalue it somewhat. The cost of bringing it all up to standard we'd estimate at around about £1,500. Because George is a qualified engineer, he's doing some of the work himself, but there are still tasks that you will need a garage to do, like the gearbox and differential oil change. That in itself cost about £450. It's roughly half and half for the parts and the labour. Adjusted for inflation, this is a car that would cost in today's money about about £76,000. And if you've never been quite sure why people like Jaguars, allow me to tell you. Small cars are generally quite fun to drive. Things like a Renault Clio, the old Peugeot 205, the new GR Yaris, they are an absolute hoot. And anything small, light, with a short wheelbase is generally quite easy to make very, very fun because they're always inherently light and therefore chuckable. Luxury, more upmarket and premium cars, though, don't seem to have that much interest in being all that driver focused. Yes, of course, you'll get things like an M3, but that's not what you'd consider a luxury car. By the time you've got to a 7 Series, an S-Class, or a large Lexus, these are often vehicles designed not for the occupant of this seat. A Jaguar is one of the few cars that really does blend luxury with sportiness very well indeed. It's one of the few upmarket cars where I feel like being in this seat I am still in the right place, because they are the sort of thing that will put a really big smile on your face almost no matter what you're doing with it. If you're stuck in traffic, you've got a stereo to keep you occupied, albeit not a brilliant one in this car. You've got your heated seats, you've got luxurious leather and wood to look at, and the thing does just comfort you. The moment I sat in this car, all your troubles simply melt away. This week I've been driving a DS7, a brand spanking new car with all sorts of technology thrown at it to try and make it one of the best luxury cars you can buy for the money. And yet still, as a luxury, comforting proposition, the Jaguar knocks it into a cocked hat. And even better, yes, the Jaguar is very nice simply to waft around in, but when you ask a little bit more of it, it will still happily deliver. There is no sports suspension button. You've got a sporty traction control mode, but all you can really make any more engaging is the gearbox. That's it. The computer-controlled CAT suspension knows what you're doing and it will adjust to suit. Even the XJRs, in fairness, didn't really ride that harshly until the very, very last X350 generation, which came about 10 years after this. There's something very special about this generation of Jag. They really were a marvellously engineered car. And sure, I can understand why people might take a look at it and go, yeah, this is Ford stuff down here, and you've got a sort of Fordy type key, and some of the handles and the plastics and that don't feel very nice, and the infotainment is absolutely ancient, and the clock up here looks a little bit awkward and cheap, and the headliner is just a little bit meh, and it's started to fall down. But you're missing the point. You're completely missing the point. This is a car that has character. This is a car that has warmth. It's just a welcoming, lovely old thing. As something to get in after a long day, when it's cold, it's raining, it's miserable outside, you've been up since the wee small hours, I can think of few better things. And then, if you do find yourself on an enjoyable stretch of country road, it can have fun too. As you might imagine, 240 horsepower, not an awful lot of torque, pulling nearly 2 tons, doesn't result in exhilarating acceleration. But if you want that, that's what the XJR is for. Instead, this is a car that actually does talk to you. It engages with you. It excites you. It is actually a real laugh to chuck around a bend. The steering in this is really quite delicious. It hasn't got the feel of, say, a Maserati. It's not sports car-like. It's always somewhat light and there's not a lot of response. But the whole car, the chassis, just moves in a way that really does belie its weight. You can be fingertip delicate with it and it will carve through a road like very little else that's this big and heavy. An S-Class would really struggle with a section of road like this, but the Jag just takes it in its stride. It's not without fault. The air suspension does struggle on more difficult surfaces. Really rough sections of road you can find it just doesn't like. But when you've got well-paved tarmac, the ride quality is excellent. Come on! You can try and use the J-gate if you want, but I've never really been a fan of them, and it doesn't always seem to pay much attention to what you tell it, so I prefer to set it in either drive or sport and then just let it do its own thing. One of the best bits about the big V8 engines is they've got such ridiculous reserves of torque. It doesn't really matter what gear you're in because the thing will just throw itself towards the horizon. Even still, this car is very good at carrying the speed that it has. The brake pedal is quite light, but the car does bring itself to a stop fairly well. The rear discs and pads were another item that on this particular car did need sorting. There's little sections like there where the road's been patched up and you can feel it just struggling a little bit with the transition. However, this is a car that makes doing the speed limit and a little bit more very, very easy. And it seems equally at home whether your name is Laird Mountbatten or Knuckles. Despite being not just a Porsche owner, but also regional organiser for the Porsche Club of Great Britain, George has taken to Jag ownership like a duck to water. He hasn't paid for a meal in 3 months. I'll admit I was so concerned when George told me he was going to be buying a car like this, because I've been there, done that and got the t-shirt with cheap Luxo barges. The fact is they rarely turn out to be as cheap as you hope. Things nearly constantly go wrong, and when they do, they're almost certainly expensive. With this car, he really has hit solid gold. Yes, it's got some flaws, but truthfully, he could have spent 10 times as much and had even more to do. Even the automatic headlights recognised instantly. We were in a shaded patch of forest there and turned themselves on straight away. We do have a warning light for the engine, and we believe that's related to one of the catalytic converters. It wasn't on until fairly recently when the car developed a misfire. The misfire has gone. That was just old spark plugs. However, we think it may have finished off one of the cats. So that's going to need replacing soon. Not only was the car quite cheap to buy, but initial maintenance aside, it actually seems like it could be quite cheap to run. On the journey up from England, George averaged over 36 to the gallon in this car. And to put that into some context, that's the same as I've been getting out of the 1.6 litre hybrid DS7. As a more real world figure, about 30 to the gallon is what he's been achieving lately on his commute to work and back. It's been pretty cold too, and I know he does like driving this car, so still, that is a figure that really does impress me. As it must be said, does the rest of the car. There's very little to not like about this. He could have paid 5 grand for it and I'd still be telling him what a bargain he'd got.
You might think that it would be insurance which stops many, particularly younger buyers, from being able to afford a car like this. Happily, you would be wrong. Because insurance costs are driven by statistics, this 3-litre luxury car actually cost £200 a year less to insure than the mini diesel it replaces.
It took me a very long time to get on the Jag train, but as soon as I did, I realised what exceptional cars they were. Even still, my focus was always on the more powerful, more luxurious variants, the XJRs, the XJ8s and the like. But this is a real cracker. I didn't think this engine would really suit this car until I remembered, or more accurately was reminded, these are actually lighter than the S-Type with which I most associate the power plant. If you are into cars and you haven't tried a Jag like this, you really should. Particularly if your only experience is something like an XE. That's a car also with admirable qualities, but as far as I'm concerned, that's not really what a Jag should be. This very much is. The chassis in this was so good that a version of it was still in use in the very last XJs ever made. The aluminium architecture lasted nearly 2 decades. Boot space is also pretty good in here. That's often an issue with some large executive cars. 7 Series, S-Class are never that good for that sort of thing. And if rear seat room isn't quite enough, there was a long wheelbase version available too. The Super V8 is the rarest of all variants I would expect because it was the top of the line, and even in 2003 cost you 76,000 quid. It was a lot of money. So today's question was, can you really buy a decent working Jag for the price of a service on a supercar? The answer, it would appear, is a fairly resounding yes, you can. Be prepared to spend just a little bit getting your car up to standard. Buy carefully because there are a lot of poor examples out there, and you will have a fine example of a really rather exceptional vehicle, even with used car prices at an all-time high. So there we have it. That's enough from me. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.